Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football, whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP. We got you covered all year long. All right, man. All right, so my next guest is a stand-up guy in the fantasy community, a content creator at Devy Marketplace and Headliner U. He's a Devy analyst, but he was kind enough to come talk some redraft with us. It's Kane Fossell. Kane, thanks for coming on, man, and welcome to the show. Oh, just completely frozen. Yeah, I don't know what happened.
For whatever reason, my computer does not like Microsoft Teams. I don't know why.
Really? Oh, man.
It's dropped me twice already. But I'm just going to close everything else, and hopefully that solves it.
How do we get this guy to go away? I mean, it doesn't matter. We're just going on video, but we're not going on video, but it's just chilling there. It's like I'm talking to two of you. It's the funniest thing.
I have no idea.
Yeah, no. All right, it's fine. If this doesn't work, we could just go to Anchor. Which won't sound as great for me, but I don't really care as much. But all right.
If it doesn't work this time, I'll just download the Teams app, and hopefully that works better than like running it through the browser.
What browser are you using? Chrome?
Yeah.
Okay. Man, I don't know. All right. We'll try it again.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. My next guest is a stand-up guy in the fantasy community, a content creator at Devy Marketplace and Headliner U. He's a Devy analyst, but he was kind enough to come join us to talk some redraft tonight. So that is Kane Fossell. Kane, thanks for coming on, man, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always fun to kind of steer the conversation away from Devy, which is what I focus on, 7 days a week. And it's nice to just talk about the incredibly disappointing Minnesota Vikings year over year.
Well, yes, if you haven't guessed it, we are continuing our NFC North breakdown, and we are talking about the Minnesota Vikings. And Kane, who is a Vikings fan, was kind enough, like I said, to come join us. So he said disappointing. They went 7-9, which, like I have here, was quite disappointing season for the Minnesota Vikings, who were coming off of a playoff season in 2019. The Vikings were expected to have a good defense with some additions that they had, but that didn't really come to fruition. Minnesota did some overall retooling of the roster, but the main core remains intact here for the Vikings. Kane, what are the feelings as it pertains to the Vikings amongst fans in Minnesota?
Well, I think the bigger thing that people have to realize, right, is just how disappointing the Vikings have been throughout the whole birth of this franchise, right? So my earliest memory that I have as a Vikings fan is the 1998 NFC Championship, where Gary Anderson missed his only field goal on the year, right? So that's the only time he's ever missed. And that's my first memory that I remember as a kid, right? And since then, it's been a series of ups and downs. So the real question is, right, what is worse as a fan? A team that is going to suck the whole season and sucks, like a Detroit Lions fan? Or would you rather be a Vikings fan when you get your hopes up, right? They start like 5-6 wins in a row, and then all of a sudden, like, they tank, and then you're like, well, what just happened, right? That's the question. And I think it's worse to be a Vikings fan because you continuously get your hopes up every year, right? So the most utilized phrase in any Minnesota sport is, this is our year, right? And then that only works until we're out of the playoffs. And then as soon as the playoffs end, then it switches to, all right, next year. We're building for next year, right? And so that's what happens. So there's a shift, right? As soon as the Vikings miss the Vikings aren't going to make the playoffs, then the tone changes to like next year, right? We just need a couple more pieces. This draft is our draft, right? Rick Spielman is just going to have a couple more pieces. Maybe it takes a cornerback, maybe it takes an offensive lineman in round one, and then we're ready, right? This is the year for the Vikings. And then guess what? We're probably going to go through the exact same cycle again. And if they end up making the playoffs, sweet, right? But then as soon as we lose, it's like, cool, we just got to retool one or two positions, right? And then we're right back in it. And it's this circle that we've like talked ourselves into, and it's like the worst thing in the world, right? And even like hearing me explain it, you're like, God, it must suck to be you. And it's like, yeah, kind of. Like Minnesota Vikings fans are like incredibly optimistic and then like the most pessimistic creatures in the world. Like that minute where we don't make the playoffs or we lose like 17-13 against the Bears, and it's like, I thought we were supposed to have good defense. It's like, we do. We gave up 17 points. Like normally, right? If you give up 17 points in an NFL game, you win, right? More than likely, right? But this is the one time our defense or our offense doesn't show up, right? So overall, I just think it's disappointing to be a Vikings fan.
Oh man, I'm sorry that I was laughing through all of that, but I just have never seen someone rant like that about
Yeah.
their team.
You know, some teams are winners and some teams are losers. And then some teams like to think they're winners, but they're actually losers, and that's what the Vikings are. And that's worse to me, right? Like it's so bad. It hurts your heart so much. Like we get our hopes up every year, right? If I go on Facebook right now, I swear I'll see 10 out of 50 posts are probably the Vikings related, right? It's like, oh, the Vikings got this. Have we talked about this first round offensive lineman enough? We totally could have grabbed him at pick 14, but no, we traded down, did the smart move, got some extra picks, and still got the same player that we were going to get in the first place. And it's like, okay, but like, is that really what we needed though? And it's like, right, we have this conversation every time. You go to a bar in Minnesota, and if someone sees you wear any sports memorabilia, they're like, Vikings fan? You're like, yeah. And it's like, what do you think about this year? It's like, probably the same that I felt the last 20 years, right? I'm going to get my hopes up. We're eventually going to lose a lot, and then my hopes are going to be broken. And then I'm going to say, next year we got it, right? It's going to happen every year, and every year I'm going to be disappointed until we win a Super Bowl.
Oh man. Okay. All right. I don't think we can continue on this topic anymore, because if we do, I won't be able to finish this podcast because I will have cramps in my abdomen. So let's move on to probably a sore subject, maybe potentially. Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
Always seems to be the butt of jokes, especially or even in the fantasy community. But Kirk Cousins was the QB 12 in fantasy points per game at just over 19 points last year, completed 67.6% of his passes for 4,265 yards, 35 passing touchdowns, 13 interceptions, plays in a prolific offense surrounded by quality weapons, but still isn't getting love from fantasy managers, even though he was a top 5 quarterback in terms of fantasy points per dropback. So he was efficient. Kane, he's going off the board according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP as the quarterback 17. Is there any value here with Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, there's a lot of value, right? Realistically, we're going to see a similar season to maybe not last year, right? In the terms of the end of the year, right? Where the defense was kind of giving up a lot of points and we had both of our main linebackers hurt and just all the injuries to the defense. But overall, the defense is going to get better. But even if you're looking at Kirk Cousins in like 2019, we're still going to have to throw the ball a lot, right? Regardless of how good Dalvin Cook is, which I think he's a tremendous running back. And we obviously want the offense to run through Dalvin Cook. That's, if anything has been made clear over the past few years, it's Dalvin Cook is the main part of that offense. And that's 100% fine, right? But even if your running back is the main part of your offense, if you can have a quarterback that's as efficient as Kirk Cousins, you have to draft him in fantasy football, right? And if we're talking redraft, sure, you might not want to draft Kirk Cousins, in the first 10, 12, 13 rounds, right? Because it doesn't make sense to be drafting Kirk Cousins when you could be drafting guys that have a much higher ceiling. But if you're a guy like me, when you play redraft and you're playing a one quarterback league, if you can get Kirk Cousins in like one of the last few picks of the draft, you're probably going to be really happy with Kirk Cousins, right? He hasn't been injured. He's rarely hurt. He's going to start every game for the Minnesota Vikings, and the Minnesota Vikings are going to put up points, right? Regardless of how many points they're going to put up, they're going to put up points, and the ball is going to move, whether that's on the ground or through the air. And now you have two good wide receivers, which obviously Justin Jefferson proved that last year. Now you have Dalvin Cook, who's hopefully going to be healthy for the full season. The offense is going to move the ball, and you're probably going to be seeing some games, right, where Kirk Cousins only throws for 250 yards. right? That's going to happen. But you're probably looking at 250 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. But guess what? He's not going to throw maybe one pick. He's not going to throw more than one pick in a game normally. So you're at least going to have a safe outlook, right? If you end up with 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, what is that? 18 points? If you get 18 points a week from your quarterback position in a redraft league, you're happy, right? Because that means you didn't stream a poor quarterback. And
Yeah.
if you can take chances at other positions like running back and wide receiver or even a tight end early and end up with Kirk Cousins that does exactly what you want him to, well, then you're probably sitting pretty good in your redraft league, right?
Yeah, no, you made all valid points there, man. I mean, Kirk Cousins going off the board is in the 11th round, at the end of the 11th round in your typical one quarterback, 12-team leagues. I think that's good value, especially when you look at the guys he's going around. I mean, one spot ahead of Tua, right behind Baker Mayfield, Justin Fields, who, just spoke about on the Bears segment, but we don't even know if he's guaranteed to be the starter for his team coming out the gate. So Kirk Cousins here, I mean, you look at again, is he going to bring you that weekly rushing floor that we look for? No, it's never going to happen. But like you were saying, there are going to be those times where he blows up for 250 yards and 2 to 3 passing touchdowns. I guess my problems with Kirk Cousins are the times where he doesn't throw that touchdown pass, or maybe he only throws one touchdown pass, and he only gets you, somewhere like 14 or 15 points, and it's like that didn't really win me the week. But at the end of the day, this Minnesota defense, while they tried to make some improvements, I don't think they really improved all that much. Patrick Peterson, loved the guy, thought he was great in his early years in his prime in Arizona, but I don't think he's anywhere close to that player. And we saw that he was a liability at times in Arizona last year. I think we could probably see some of the same here. And so I don't think the secondary, maybe some of these young guys like Cam Dantzler, and Jeff Gladney get better, and maybe they get some improvement that way. But I think Kirk Cousins is still going to have to air it out. And if like you had said before, Dalvin Cook, he seems to be the guy that this offense tries to turn to. They try to run it through him. Came into 2020 with some concerns about his contract and a potential holdout, but that was just all a distant memory. Received a new contract prior to the season, prior to the start of the season, and it was his best season yet. Had a career high in rushing with 1,557 rushing yards. Also a career high in total touchdowns with 17. Also set a career high in yards for scrimmage with 1,900 total yards. So was the RB3 in fantasy points per game at 24.1. Was the RB2 overall in terms of fantasy points, but enters 2021 as the RB2 in terms of ADP. Kane, is there any reason fantasy managers shouldn't expect much of the same from the Iron Chef in Dalvin Cook?
No, it's the exact same, man. Dalvin Cook's good, and he's going to be good. And not only is he going to run a lot in an outside zone run scheme that allows him to use his bend ability. Sure, you might think that Dalvin Cook's not the fastest guy necessarily, but his athletic ability is really, really high because he's a guy that can easily bend around corners. He doesn't have to make a quick cut and a stop to do that and then move up the field. He can bend really easily around moving linebackers and moving offensive linemen. So really, if he finishes anything under like running back 3, it's a surprise.
Yeah, man. I mean, definitely. Obviously, there's Saquon Barkley coming back. So he's obviously coming off the ACL. So there's that question. But Alvin Kamara, we have the question of whether he's going to be the same guy. So there's room here. I don't think it really matters. You're going to draft Dalvin. You're not drafting Dalvin Cook because you're hoping he finishes 2. You're drafting Dalvin Cook because you're hoping that he's going to finish at least in the top 3 or 4, and on a weekly basis going to give you that volume that you need to give you an advantage over your league mates. So, what do you think about the narrative that you should avoid Dalvin Cook I haven't heard it as much this year because maybe he nipped it in the butt last year, but avoiding Dalvin Cook because he's quote unquote injury prone.
Well, then you have to be worried about Saquon Barkley. You have to be worried about Christian McCaffrey. You have to be worried about Joe Mixon. You have to be worried about Austin Eckler. You have to be worried about DeAndre Swift. You have to be right. So then I can just keep naming running backs over and over and over again. And why don't we hear the same from them? Well, because when a player's just good, you have to try to find other ways to knock him. And so they're saying he's injury prone, right? And sure, he's missed some games and he's had some repeated shoulder injuries. And if he probably dislocates the shoulder again in the same way, he's probably going to need surgery, right? That's just something that's probably going to happen. But the fun thing about Dalvin Cook, he gets tackled a whole lot less than other running backs, right? Because he's just better, right? He's going to get 7-8 yards. And guess what? He's not getting crunched by defensive linemen. He's going to get hit by cornerbacks and safeties because he's always getting to the second, third level, right? That's just the way that it is with this offense. So I don't worry about him being injury prone because as soon as I do that, well, then I have to worry about every other running back too. And maybe I'm worried about his age a little bit if I'm talking dynasty, right? Because he's on a second contract guy. He's already 25, 26 years old. So I get it, right? But in redraft, you can't expect everyone to be hurt. If so, then why are you playing? Right? just draft the all injury team and just see how many injuries you can get, right? But instead, we're playing fantasy football and we're trying to find upside. And the one guy that consistently gives you not only just good points, but upside with really, really big weeks at the running back position, there's only a few of them, right? There's really just three. There's Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook. You pick which one you want. I would prefer Dalvin Cook over Derrick Henry just because he's going to catch 50 passes. So give me that over Derrick Henry, but Christian McCaffrey is just the only other one that you have to watch out for. And let's be real, if you have the 101, you're probably taking Christian McCaffrey anyways. So,
yeah, I don't think there's any reason to be hesitant to draft Dalvin Cook because of injury history. Because, like you said, injuries are going to happen, especially at the running back position. If you're afraid of injuries, like you said, don't play redraft. Instead, go play DFS because then injuries won't be as much of a problem.
Right. At least then you know who's injured before the week, right?
Yeah. So, all right, man, let's move on because obviously the running back position is easy. I think the wide receiver position is a little bit easy anyway. But Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, both players finished as wide receiver ones on the year. Thielen was the wide receiver 11 in terms of PPR points per game, averaging 16.9 points. He saw just 108 targets across 15 games, but he turned that into 74 catches, 924 yards, and 14 touchdowns, which is a career high for him. Then entered Justin Jefferson, coming off a phenomenal rookie season where he turned 125 targets into 88 catches for 1,400 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. The receiving yards was a rookie NFL record, breaking that of former Minnesota Viking great Randy Moss. Jefferson finished as the wide receiver 9 with just over 17 PPR points per game in his rookie season. Thielen going off the board as wide receiver 19. Jefferson going off the board as wide receiver 8. Do either of these two guys present a value to you, and is there one that you might prefer at their respective price?
Both. I think both are probably going to finish higher than what their ADP is. I think Justin Jefferson, I actually just drafted Justin Jefferson in a redraft league. I'm in a best ball league, so I ended up getting Justin Jefferson and DK Metcalf back-to-back on a turn, and I was really, really happy with that. When you pair that with Patrick Mahomes, you feel a whole lot better about your team. But overall, right, I think Justin Jefferson... Yeah, sorry. I'm just really good. No, when we look at Justin Jefferson, if he's being drafted as the wide receiver 8, and we're expecting a similar kind of amount of times thrown, right? If we're looking at the similar passing attempts, he's going to have a relatively similar season. And I'm not saying he's going to, bust as many long plays, things like that, right? But he's probably still going to be a top 8 receiver, right? And as long as he's a top 8 receiver and he's at wide receiver 8, like if he's still the wide receiver 8 and you draft him at wide receiver 8, that's good, right? Because that means he didn't bust. And let's be real, if you're a Justin Jefferson owner, you want Adam Thielen to be good, right? I don't know how many times we have to explain this, right? It's like, oh, are you worried about having 2 good wide receivers on the same team? No. Because if one person is also doing well, then they can't repeatedly put double coverage on the same guy, right? They have to mix up coverages and make the quarterback think, right? So as long as both are performing, they're both going to do well. I think Adam Thielen at wide receiver 18 is goofy because they're going to have to throw the ball a lot, and they're going to be an effective offense. Sure, you can say, but Kane, he's probably not going to catch 14 touchdowns. Yeah, that's accurate. He's probably also not going to be a top 12 wide receiver in points per game. But like, if he just finishes as a wide receiver 2, you're still happy. So draft them both. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, Thielen definitely, he's a guy that really saw, 3 years ago was seeing 140, 150 targets in a season. Just saw 108 last year across 15 games, like I mentioned. But I think he's still good enough where he's still going to be involved in this offense. I don't think Justin Jefferson's completely taken it away from him. I do think there's possibly some regression for the both of these guys in the touchdown department. You saw Adam Thielen scoring 14 touchdowns on 925 receiving yards, while Justin Jefferson only scores 7 on 1,400 receiving yards. I think those two got to even out a little bit.
Sure.
So I think there's still some room there potentially for Justin Jefferson to grow a little bit there in that touchdown department, especially with the kind of big games that he was having last year. I mean, his first real impact was 7 for 175, and I think it was was it 3 touchdowns?
I think it was 2. And then you might say, Kane, how many shares of Jefferson did you have? I said, I had a few. How many did you trade directly after that game? All of them. How do you feel about that? Terrible. But, when you're a cynical Vikings fan, right? You're like, no way this guy's going to do this again. That's a fluke. And then here we are.
Kane, I feel bad for you, man.
It's just par for the course. We try to make everything as painful as possible when you're Vikings fans, so you just kind of get used to it. But at least I got good returns, right? So it's okay, I guess. But, Justin Jefferson, right? He's probably going to catch more touchdowns. Will Adam Thielen's touchdown total go down a little bit? Probably. But it says something, right? When they want the old veteran in the red zone, right? Because he has a better rapport with Kirk Cousins. They've been there a while together, right? Mm-hmm. They know exactly what each other are going to do. So it makes sense that he's catching more touchdowns. It does, right? Because you're not as free in the red zone versus, when you're throwing it at your own 20 on first down, you can probably be a little more free than in the red zone, right? Because you want to come away with points.
Yep.
But overall, right, I think they're both just going to be really, really good values. And I really wouldn't be mad if I ended a team or ended a draft with Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen on the same team.
Yeah, no, definitely would not be mad about that.
Right.
From a DFS perspective, I think that sounds nice because you don't even have to commit to it. Just stack them in if the game permits. But, like you said, Adam Thielen benefiting from the relationship he has with Kirk Cousins in the red zone might also be benefiting from the departure of Kyle Rudolph, who we knew, we used to call him the Rudolph the red zone reindeer. So, probably is going to benefit from that a little bit. But someone who might benefit from that is Irv Smith. Fantasy managers have been waiting for what seems like forever now for Irv Smith to break out, but he's only entering his 3rd season, so find that interesting. His 1st season without Kyle Rudolph, like I mentioned, so fantasy managers are expecting that big step forward here for Irv Smith. Was the tight end 25 in terms of PPR points per game at just over 7.5 points. If he can take a step forward here as the tight end 1 for Minnesota and make an impact for the Vikings, he could potentially step into tight end 1 territory in terms of fantasy. Going off the board is the tight end 11. Kane, are you buying what Irv Smith is selling?
No. Right. And so the reason for that, right, is that if you think that you're going to have a top 2 or 3 running back, 2 top probably 15 wide receivers, and you think there's still going to be a whole lot of love for the tight end to have week over week value, it's probably not accurate, right? Regardless of what Kyle Rudolph does, and I think Kyle Rudolph was a tremendous blocker, and it's really going to suck because he was just a good dude, right? And he was really important for the locker room. But I think they're going to continue to run 12 personnel, right? So they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. And so Tyler Conklin and Irv Smith Jr. are going to be the tight ends. And sure, if you want to get excited about Irv Smith, I get it. but I don't think the week over week value in a redraft league is going to be there. I think really the ticket in redraft leagues this year is to get a top three guy, top 3 or 4 tight end, and make sure that you lock down that production, regardless of if there's tight end premium or not, right? As long as you can lock down that position, you'll feel a whole lot better about your team. So I'm kind of just fading every other tight end, and I don't really want to take shots on like this middle tier. I'd rather take shots on guys that could have a big year rather than trying to find a middling tight end that's going to have week over week success in a redraft league. Because I think you're going to end up streaming a whole lot more than you want to, especially if you're drafting Irv Smith at the tight end 11 price, which is much higher than you want it to be.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, man. I don't see how Irv Smith's role changes really much, changes much in this offense without Kyle Rudolph, because it's not like Kyle Rudolph was playing this role where he was, seeing a significant amount of targets in this offense anyway. And if you're expecting this offense to deviate from being a 12 personnel offense, then well, that's not really going to happen. The bread is buttered here for the Minnesota Vikings in 12 personnel when you
Right.
consider.
I think it's like the highest percentage of any team in the NFL, and Kirk Cousins has the highest um, completion percentage of any quarterback in 12 personnel. That makes sense, right? Like it makes a ton of sense because what do the Vikings do almost more than any other team is play action.
Hmm.
Makes a ton of sense. You have one of the best running backs in the NFL at just
Hmm.
rushing the ball, so it makes sense, right? But normally when you do a ton of play action, your tight ends aren't usually your targets because sometimes they need to stay in and at least fake the block a little bit. And when
Hmm.
you have two good wide receivers, it's just a whole lot easier. The game is easier.
Yeah.
So I don't see a period where I think Irv Smith could have a few game stretch that's really good when the Vikings are still trying to figure out who their wide receiver 3 is, and they're like, oh, we can just put Irv out there for a little bit, right? But I think overall for his fantasy finish, he'll probably finish worse than tight end 11. And I would gladly be wrong as a Vikings fan, right? I'd love that. It means the team's a little bit better than I thought they were, or someone got hurt, which would suck. But overall, I think Irv Smith just isn't the bet you want to make.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. It's going to take an injury or, maybe those weeks where he's got a particularly good matchup. You know that Minnesota is in like a 54.5 point over under or something like that. And this team is particularly weak against the tight end. And so Irv Smith might have a good opportunity there. So
Yeah.
maybe you look to him that as a streaming option. Kane, man, this was a lot of fun, brother. But before I let you go, I have to ask you one more question, man.
Sure.
How do you see this division breaking down, and where are the Vikings finishing?
Well, it depends if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. If Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback, the Vikings are going to finish second. If Aaron Rodgers is not the quarterback, the Vikings probably win the division. Like, and that is totally reliant on their defense, right? You have to have Michael Pierce back, and you have to be able to stop the run. Daniil Hunter has to be back to what he was, right? Anthony Barr has to be healthy. Eric Kendricks has to be an all-star middle linebacker, right? Because you have to have all of those things working in the front seven. Because other than Harrison Smith, you have no known commodities in the secondary, right? So you have to help them out as much as possible. And no wonder they got beat up, right? Daniil Hunter wasn't playing. You didn't have a top 5 defensive end playing. So yeah, there was no pass rush. When Daniil Hunter's back, that opens up a whole lot more for this offense. Or for the defense rather. So I think things are going to be better. And I think there's going to be quite a few games that still end up in a relative shootout because you're dealing with really, really young cornerbacks or a really, really old Patrick Peterson. But I think the team is poised well to make a much better finish than what many people want to give them. I'm seeing a lot of 7 and 10s, and I just think the team is a whole lot better than 7 and 10.
Yeah, no, I definitely have it the way you have it, right? Where if Aaron Rodgers comes back, this division goes through Green Bay. If he doesn't come back, well, if he doesn't come back, then I have to have a conversation, right? I mean, I
Right.
think it's a two-horse race between Chicago and Minnesota at that point. And I could see it honestly going either way, just depending on how a few games go here and there. But I would give the slight edge to Minnesota. But yeah, it'll be interesting, and like you said, it'll come down to that defense and a lot of these guys staying healthy and how these guys in the secondary shake out. But Kane, man, this was fun, bro. Let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find your content, and what you got going on, man.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Devi_Kane. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so if you have questions, make sure to let me know over on Twitter. My podcast is the Devi Marketplace podcast, where we take a different look at Devi than you've probably ever heard of before. We try to make sure that we're actually increasing our value on Devi players because they're not scoring points for us right now. So we want to make sure that our team's consistently getting better with assets that aren't scoring points. And right, that's what you want to do in the off season. But why stop at the off season? Why not do it with Devi players as well and make sure your team's the best it can be? So that's what we do at the Devi Marketplace. We have a really fun Patreon where it's patreon.com/Devi Marketplace, where you get an extra podcast, a chat, all that fun stuff, and we'll help you with your teams. And then if you're a YouTube person, right, go to youtube.com/headlineru, and you'll see me over there doing 2 videos a week during the season, breaking down what happened in college football and some Devi assets that you need to look forward to each week. So that'll be going on at Headliner U, which is the college side of the Fantasy Headliners, which is one of the best and biggest YouTube fantasy football places that you can go. So go and check that out because we're doing a lot of fun stuff over there. But other than that, man, thank you so much for having me on. It was fun to talk Vikings with someone other than my wife because I don't think she can take like another Vikings conversation. Because it's like, oh, you want to go to a game? She goes, why would I watch them lose? And it's like, I don't need that type of sadness from you, right? I have that in my own heart. I don't need to hear it, right? Like I hear it enough. I don't need it from you, you know?
Yeah, man. Well, you know what? I'm a Jets fan, as you can see in the back, right? So, I feel some of your pain. Maybe not as much of your highs, but I definitely the lows I felt. But like I said, man, appreciate you coming on. If you're not checking Kane out on Twitter, he's a very good follow. I'm not into Devi, but when I do get into Devi, because I'm sure it's probably down the road for me one day, definitely gonna go check Kane out because he puts out some A1 content, man. So Kane, again, appreciate you, and everybody out there listening, definitely appreciate you checking this out, and we will catch y'all later. Peace.